Hello everyone, welcome to today's video on chess pieces, their values, how they move, and what are their special powers. This is what we are going to cover in this video. And before we get started, it is essential to understand how the pieces are set at the starting of the game. So you have already seen the notations which I explained in the previous video. In this video, we should learn how to place the pieces in their right squares. Now, let me quickly introduce the pieces. These tiny little ones, 8 pieces here, are called pawns. They are the fundamental blocks of your forces. Each pawn is worth about 1 point. They are typically placed at A2, B2, C2, D2, E2, F2, G2 and H2. This is from white's perspective. Similarly, black will place its pawns on A7, B7, C7, D7, E7, F7, G7 and H7. So that's about placing the pawns is concerned. Next, I introduce this piece. There are 2 pieces at the corners. You can see all the corners you can see. This is called rook. Each rook is worth 5 points. The white rooks are placed at A1 and H1. Black places his rooks on A8 and H8. So we learnt about pawn position and rook's position. Now let me introduce knights. There are 2 knights in your army, one on B1, another one on G1. Similarly, you can see for black, one on B8, another on G8. Then we have another piece called bishop, which is on C1 and F1. So again, you got 2 bishops, each worth 3 points. So the knights are also worth 3 points. The bishops are also worth 3 points. They are equal, almost equal in terms of its material value. Rooks on the other side are worth 5 points and pawns are worth 1 point each. Then I introduce you to this powerful piece, the queen, which sits on D1 for white and D8 for black. And at last I introduce you to the king. This is the most important piece on board. The main goal of the game is to capture the king, and white tries to capture black's king, black tries to capture white's king with the pieces. So that's all about your pieces. The king is on E1 and black king is on E8. One thing you should notice that they are symmetrical. You can see all the pieces are symmetrically placed. They are facing off each other. Right? Now that's all about your pieces and how to set them at the starting of the game. Next, we are going to learn about each of our pieces in detail. So when I say pieces, the one that is sitting here on the first rank and on the last rank are called pieces. Pawns are not pieces, pawns are just pawns. So when I say pieces, they're knights, bishops, rooks and queens and king. Yeah, these are pieces. And pawns are the fundamental blocks of your army. First, we will try to understand how they move and what are their special forces. Special movements that they possess. As you can see, we got 8 pawns in our army, and black also got 8 pawns on his side. The first thing to remember about pawns is they move either 1 square from its starting position or 2 squares from its starting position. This is the only time a pawn is allowed to move 2 steps forward. That's your choice whether you want to make your first move as one move or two moves, but after that, it's always one move at a time. For example, white can play e3, or he can also choose to play e4. Yep. Now, black can push e6 or e5. Not necessarily that he has to push this, he can also push this here or here. It's up to him. Just for the ease of understanding, I'm going to move this pawn 2 steps forward. We can move, for example, this pawn 1 step forward or 2 steps forward. For illustration purpose, let's say that it moves 1 step forward. Right? Now, you can also choose to move this 2 steps forward. As it moves, there is one feature that I wanted to introduce about pawns. I said the pawns can only move straight forward 1 step or 2 step, but there are conditions under which it can move sideways 1 square, either to the left or to the right. Like in this case, black has an option to capture this pawn. So capturing is one of the important features of the pawn. How they can do it? Whenever there is something ready to capture on this side or on this side diagonally, then it is allowed to capture. Black can choose to capture like this. Now, let's say white goes ahead and plays f4, moving 2 steps forward. Let's say, for example, black plays 1 step forward. Now, white wants to push this pawn 1 step forward. It cannot go 2 steps. You need to understand the pawns can only move 2 steps forward from its starting position, not after that. Now, this pawn, which is sitting here, cannot say that I will go 2 steps forward. It's not allowed. You can only move 1 step forward from its starting position. So keep that in mind. And it's white's turn now. White plays, let's say, e4 to e5. Right? Now, can black capture this pawn? If so, which pawn can capture? So take your time. Think about it. Which pawn can capture this e5 pawn? The answer is this f6 pawn can actually move 1 step diagonally and capture this pawn like this. Yeah. So once that's captured, now white can white recapture it like this? Is it allowed? Of course, yes. You can recapture it like this. Now, I introduce you to a new concept, one more special move from pawns. Let's say here white tries to push 2 steps forward, right? Now, if he had played this here, he could have captured it like this. But unfortunately, white tried to bypass and not give him an opportunity to capture back. So in this situation, there is a special rule called en passant that black can choose to apply. I have made a special video on covering only the en passant alone with lot of examples, which I will share it in the description below. You can check and watch that video as well for better understanding. But for now, if white tries to bypass without giving black an opportunity by moving 2 steps forward, black can choose to capture it as if the pawn was on c3, like this. So this is called en passant. All right. So en passant is one of the important concepts that apply only for pawns that you should keep in mind. Then let's say b pawn takes this back, And now black tries to push two steps here with this pawn. Now, what should white do here? Should he en passant here, or should he en passant here? How is it possible? Where can this pawn go while it does en passant? If white chooses to do en passant, will it land on d5 or on d6? Think about it. The answer is white will land on d6. That's how you can do en passant. But remember, just because you got a chance to do en passant doesn't mean that you should do it. You need to think whether it is required or not. Because I will introduce you to one more important feature of these pawns, the special powers of these pawns. That is, you can ignore this pawn and do not do en passant, because after you do it, he is going to capture it and nothing you achieved. But let's say you choose to move this pawn forward. Then let's say black tries something like this. You kept on pushing this pawn forward. Again, let's say he tries pushing this pawn here. Now, this pawn reaches the last rank. And here you have 4 options. You can either promote it into a queen, or you can promote it into a rook, or you can promote it into a bishop, or you can promote it into a knight. So you can choose to promote it as any piece that you would like to have on the board. So that's the special power of pawns. It can be promoted into a piece of your choice. It can be a queen, rook, knight, or a bishop. All right. So quickly, I will do a recap. The pawns move only 1 square or 2 squares from its starting position. That's the only time you have an option to choose whether you want to push it 1 step forward or 2 steps forward. After that, it can only move straight 1 square at a time. You can move sideways provided there is some piece or pawn to capture diagonally to the left or to the right 1 square, right? So that is about capture. Third, you have a special concept called en passant, where when you're denied of an opportunity to capture your opponent's pawn and he tries to jump 2 steps forward, denying you an opportunity, then you can take that pawn and place it to the square as if the piece was on the square that is denied. For example, in this case, if he was pushing it here, he could have very well taken it, but he denied and then he played d5. Now you can choose to do en passant. And en passant by itself has a lot of other special conditions, which I have listed in that video. Which I will also give a quick overview here. In the sense, you can only take it on the next move. You cannot go on playing some other move and say that, let's say black plays this, and you cannot come back and say that I will do en passant. That's not allowed. You can do en passant only on the very next move, not later. So that's one condition. You can check that video in the description. So the last point I wanted to bring in here is that when the pawn reaches the last rank, it can either be promoted into a queen, or into a knight, or into a bishop, or into a rook. So the choice is yours. You can promote it into any piece that you want. And that's all about pawns. Next, I will introduce you the king, the most important piece on board. This piece is critical because the entire game depends on its safety. If you want to win your opponent, all that you need to do is, say as white, you need to capture its king. Checkmate, that's called. And on the other hand, black will also try to capture your king if you're playing white. So both the sides have the kings in this position, and let's understand how the king moves. It can move one square in any direction, to the left, to the right, up one step. This is the edge of the board, otherwise it could have moved backwards as well. It can go to the left and to the right diagonally. One square in any direction it can go. For example, let's say the king goes to e2. Let's say black brings it to e7. King goes to d2, d7, e3, e6, d4. Now let's try to understand one special condition for the kings. The kings cannot move to the common square. So between them, these are the common square. You cannot walk into it because they oppose each other. Both the kings cannot be on an adjacent square. It's not allowed. You cannot reach here. You cannot reach here. It's legally not allowed. So neither can he come closer. That's also not allowed. So both the kings cannot be on the adjacent squares, either diagonally or left, right, up, down. In any direction, they cannot be in adjacent squares. So that's something we need to keep in mind. All right. Let's see the next power of kings. There is one more thing as it comes to king that you should remember. The king, let's say, white plays b4. Now, what is happening? This pawn is attacking this pawn, this king, or it can also choose to go forward in the next move, provided black doesn't do anything to this pawn. Now, as you see, the king is under attack. Whenever the king is under attack, you cannot do any other move. Say, for example, you cannot, try pushing this pawn or try pushing this pawn. There are only three options that you have. Either you run away with the king to anywhere safe, avoid the attack. That's one thing that you can do. Or capture the piece that's attacking you. In this case, you can take it like this. Or let's say if there was some other piece that can come in between, since there are no squares in between, you cannot place any piece in between this to stop the attack. You cannot block an attack in this case, but otherwise you can also choose to block. So either you capture, or you move to the safe square, or you block. These are the three options you have with your king. Now let's say black captures. Now white captures back. Now the king is under attack. What can he do? And what should he do? Of course, in this case, he can take this pawn because there is no other pawns protecting it. Earlier, it was not possible to capture it like this because you cannot walk into an attack. That's not allowed because it's protected by this pawn. Right. So that's the second condition about king. When it is under attack, you cannot play any other move than protecting your king, either by eliminating the attack or blocking it or moving away. And finally, I introduce you to the special moves of the king. So there is a special move for the king. And before I talk about it, you should also know that this piece is called a rook. And let me quickly talk about it so that you understand how it moves. It can move straight in any direction, But here it cannot cross this one because it's your own pawn. It's blocking you from moving. It can just move straight, either left, right, up, or down. So that's how it moves. Here, the legally allowed squares are 1, 2, 3. You can choose to move 3 square in any of these 3 squares. You can either go here, or go here, or go all the way to D1. So that's how it moves. I will talk additionally on this further, but let's focus on the king alone. The king has a special feature here called castling. So what is a castling? I said the king can move only 1 square in any direction. However, in the castling alone, it is allowed to move 2 squares, either to the left or to the right. And it can happen under certain conditions. The first condition is that the king should have never moved, and the king cannot be under attack, and the rooks should not have moved. Okay, so these are the 3 conditions. I have also made another video on this, and it's available. That link description also I will put it in the description section. You can watch that later. For now, I'll show you how the castling is done. You move 2 squares to the right, and the rook moves 2 squares to the left. Now this is called castling. You swap by moving your king 2 steps to the right and rook 2 steps to the left. This is called castling, because you are protecting your king behind these pawns like a castle. It shields from any sort of attack. So that's called a castling. This castling is called short side castling because the king moves only 2 squares and the rook also moves only 2 squares. There is one other way that you can castle, which is the king moving 2 squares to the left and the rook moving 3 squares to the right. This is called long side castling because the rook from this side travels a little extra space. So this is called a long side castling. Now, black can also, say for example, I castle this side. Black can also choose to castle this side, or he can also choose to castle this side. So both are perfectly fine. But if white castles this side, look at this rook looking at this square. Now black cannot castle this side. It's not allowed because you cannot cross the line of attack while castling. That's one thing you need to keep in mind. So the only possible castling for black right now is to go the shorter side. And another part is, let's say white simply castled and black plays some random move like a6. Now rook comes and attacks. You cannot, it's a check. It's a check. Whenever the king is under attack, it's called a check. So what are the options? Can you eliminate this rook from with any of your pieces? No, there is no piece to attack. You cannot block the check with any other pieces. So the only option that you have is to move your king. Maybe you move here. Now, black has lost the right to castle because he has moved his king. So these are the special features when it comes to rook king. So I hope you got a fair understanding of how king moves and what are the special moves that it has, and how the kings cannot come close to each other. There has to be at least 1 square space between the opponent kings. So you cannot come to the adjacent squares. So that's something you need to remember about kings. Now let's learn about bishop. Bishops are the most simplest pieces. You see there are 2 bishops, one on c1 and one on f1 at the start of the game. All you need to know is that they move diagonally anywhere as long as there is space. So either they can choose to go h6, from there it can go to f8, from there it can, let's say, b4, and maybe you wanted to come to no, c3, things like that. And if you remember, all the squares that it went was in dark square. Since they move diagonally, they can only move in the same color as they are from their starting position. Now let's look at this bishop. Now let's say I move this bishop here, then I go here, now I go here, then let's say I want to bring it back to d1. Now what happened? It has traveled all this path from h3 to d7, d7 to a4. From there it reached here. And black reached here, moving all these spaces, coming here, then reaching here. You can see that they can only move in the squares into the same color as their starting position, and they cannot switch their diagonals at any point in time. They can only stay in the same diagonal as their starting position square color. So that's all about bishops. So the next piece that we are going to learn about is rooks. So the rooks are second most powerful piece on the board after the queen. They are pretty straightforward pieces. They can move straight up as long as there are squares available for them, and right, left, and down. So that's how they move. They move in any direction straight forward. Yeah. So if I ask you till where it can reach up to a4, because you have your own pawn. You cannot go and capture your own pawn. So that's not allowed. So its range is, as long as there is an open space, it can go till the end of it. For example, if this rook moved one step to the right, then it has even more squares to reach. And let's say if this rook wants to move here, it again got a whole file to go. And there is still more space for the rooks to move. As long as there is, of course, it cannot go here. Its range is still here because you cannot capture your own piece. So it can reach only till here. So this is the range. As long as there is space, you can move your rooks to the very end of it. Now, if I ask you how many squares can this rook move straight up? Like, can it reach here? This square, this rook, can it reach here? Of course not. It can reach only one square to the front because you have your own pawns blocking it. But if I have to, say, bring my rook in any way to h7. Now, if I wanted to bring this rook to h7, how do I get it there? I can choose to move anywhere here, go here, and then move here. Or I can go here, and move here. So it has a lot of flexibility. You can go to d1, d7, and h7. Or it can go to c1, c7, h7. So you have multiple choices available for the rooks to reach a particular square. So it has tremendous space and it's a long distance range piece. Yeah. So that's all about the rooks. And remember, rooks are also involved in the castling with the king, and which we learned about it just a while ago. So that's everything that you need to know about rooks. All right. Queen is a very interesting piece. Of course, it is the most powerful piece on the board. It comes with 9 points worth, and how it is going to move. If you know how it moves, you'll be surprised. It moves exactly like a bishop, and it can also move like a rook. So it is combination of rooks and bishops. So when you see this queen can move like a rook, as long as there is space, it can move forward. It can go to its right. It can go to its left. It can go diagonally like a bishop. It can go diagonally like bishop again here. So look at the kind of range that it covers at a single given instance. Now this queen can also move like a pawn one step forward and change the diagonal colors. Previously we learned about bishops. The bishops only move the same color diagonal as it is placed. But here, queen has an option to change its diagonal color by shifting one square left, right, whatever. Even you can choose to move like a rook from a lighter square. You can go to A1 and change your diagonal, colors. So it's a very, very flexible piece and a monstrous piece. You can see in no time she can just wipe off all the pawns on the board, like going to h5, attacking on this pawn, but she can also save the time by going and capturing this pawn first. Then from there you can go and capture this pawn. Then on a7, then comes to c5, then comes to g5. Look at the kind of power that your queen has. So it's a combination of rook and a bishop. Okay, the next piece that we are going to learn about is knight. Knights are a very special and amusing piece in the game of chess because that's the only piece that can jump over your own forces and reach to the other side. They have a very special way of moving, and I request you all to pay attention to the conditions under which it moves. It moves 2 steps forward, backward, or sideways, and then 1 square to the right or left. Let me explain how it moves pictorially now. It can go 2 steps forward, to the left or to the right, and which means it will directly land on to this square or this square if it chooses to go forward. Similarly, if it chooses to go backwards, again left or right, which means it can either reach here directly or here directly. Again, you can see that 4 squares it can go either forward or backward. Alternatively, it can also choose to go sideways, 2 steps forward, left and right, which is these 2 squares it can directly jump into. Or it can go right, sideways, left or right, either here or here. So the knight can go from this 1 square, it can reach to c3, c5, d2, d6, f2, f6, g3 or g5. So it can just jump to any of these squares. And remember, you cannot capture anything on the way. Like say there is a pawn, your opponent's pawn here. Although I say that it jumps here, it doesn't mean that you can capture everything on the way and reach here. It just means that you can, if there is your opponent pawn here or any piece here, you can go ahead and capture this way. That's allowed. But you cannot capture anything that it is crossing over. For example, there is a pawn either on this square or this square or this square. You cannot capture any of it. It can only jump over it and reach here. So that's how the knight moves. Let's study further about the knight movements and their special features, right? So I bring in the next position. In this position, it is white's turn to play. Now I challenge you to find the number of squares that it can go from this b1 square. I give you about 5 seconds. The clue is that it can reach about 3 squares from here. Can you spot all the 3 squares? That's right. The first square is a3. It can go to c3, or it can go to d2. So these are the three squares from its starting position that it can reach. It looks like a very limited number of moves for a piece, but then trust me, when it jumps here, can you calculate how many squares that it can reach? I give you about 10 seconds, or maybe if you want more time, feel free to pause the video. Think about it. How many squares can this knight move? Okay, I hope you took your time. I'm going to reveal the answers. It can, of course, go back to b1 from where it came from, or to a2, or to d1, or to e2. At the same time, it can go to e4, or d5, or b5, or a4. As you can see, it has such a very complicated and amusing way of moving from one square to the other. And the moment it moves from its starting position, it towards the center, it can reach as many as 8 squares at any point in time. So that makes this piece a very important and interesting piece. Now let's say black wants to move this knight. What are his options? Again, I give you time. Maybe you can think. Okay, I hope you found all the squares that this knight can move. It's a6, c6, and d7. Let's say this knight goes to c7. Now, can you see what are the squares it's attacking from this square? That's right. It can go back to a7, b8, a5, b4, d4, e5, and e7, and d8. So these are the 8 squares that this knight can reach to. And one more part that I wanted to mention here is the knight can attack two pieces which are split far apart in one single move, just like this. It's attacking the king as well as the pawn in this case. This is called a fork. A knight can fork pieces while other pieces can only double attack or pin or something like that, which we will explore later. For now, knight is the only piece that can give fork to your opponent pieces. So I will show you another position, and I want you to get used to their movements because they are a bit tricky. Unlike bishops, they are not so linear. They have their own dynamic ways of moving. So I give you one puzzle to solve and get comfortable with their movements. So here you see white as a knight. Can you think of ways to pick up all these black pawns only with the help of your knight? Right? Feel free to pause the video. Maybe if you want, you can set it up on your chessboard and try to find out. It's not easy to visualize. So I give you all the time that you need. Feel free to pause the video, and I will be revealing the answers in a moment. All right. I hope you thought through and found these interesting moves. First, knight goes to b5. From there, he can jump to d6. From here, he can go and jump to b7. And from there, he can jump to a5. Now, he has to run to the other side of the board. So, knight c4, knight e5, knight g6, and knight takes pawn, and then knight goes to f5, then knight to g7, and then knight takes this pawn. So that's all about the knights. I hope you got a very good understanding of how knight moves and what is a fork, and get comfortable by practicing this quite often, because knights are very tricky for beginners to memorize how they move, and then look into the kind of patterns in which they move to capture the pawns. See, even though this pawn was like in adjacent squares, it took almost like 3 moves to capture the other pawn. The moment it captured here, it took 1, 2, and 3. So it's a very tricky maneuvering of pieces that you should get comfortable with. And that brings us to the end of this video on how chess pieces move, their special movements, and also the conditions under which you can perform certain actions like en passant, castling, and so on. I hope you enjoyed the video. Feel free to write your comments, and if you have any specific questions, please drop down a message. I will try to answer all your questions, and any specific learning that you wanted, do let me know. I will make a new video on that.